this movie raises a lot of very interesting questions. It shows the limits of the markets, but also I think that Rainer always explain why these markets are also necessary. I would like to invite you to ask him questions if you have questions, and to discuss with Rainer about what you have seen and what you may want to discuss about the crisis, its consequences, and the next steps. And we have been all thrilled by the next step, Frank Reich. Then
can I say a few words for the start? Because I saw that movie maybe the last time 8 or 10 weeks ago, and today I couldn't help it and watched it again. And what's really struck me, I mean, the interviews were done between early 2012 and the last one in 2013 in March. But doesn't it sound like you had it done? I had it done yesterday. So I think it's all these things I have been talking about will be with us for quite a long time. And wait what happens tomorrow and on Sunday, and off we go again.
Alors, qu'est-ce qui souhaite s'exprimer en premier, s'il vous plaît, please?
I'm a former banker. I worked with Citibank after Dauphine in mergers and acquisitions, so I know part of the story. Which is very striking for me is that in your experience as a banker, you don't speak about major problems that occur, because we always say, well, you know, the bankers did it very badly and so on and so on. What about the euro, which was a major political mistake? We had Stiglitz in that room agreeing with that idea. What about the interest rates that were maintained very low by the ECB for quite a long time, while the inflation was very high? What about the public spending, which is, you know, becoming just crazy? So now I see that film putting a lot of emphasis on bankers. What about other factors that explain the crisis in which we live?
I'm not so sure whether this is really an explanation for what happened, but okay, I'm not a scientist, but I can comment on a few things. The euro, was it a mistake? You're always cleverer in hindsight. Now we are stuck with that thing, and we have to find a strategy what to do with it. There are a few things I don't understand. QE I don't understand. So that's the stuff that most probably Mr. Draghi will announce tomorrow. I'm a big friend of helicopter money in that case, because apparently we have a demand deficiency, and Milton Friedman once developed this idea to just, you know, drop money on every European citizen. In this case, let's say like 10,000 euros, then you have a QE of 3,000 billion, 3,000 billion, and that will take us far away. What I don't like about QE is the economic consequences are very uncertain. But one thing is for certain: the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. And I think, you know, using the helicopter money approach would do a lot of good in terms of making a little more equal what has become very unequal. What were the other topics? The interest rates. Yeah, good question. You know, if to produce things doesn't cost you anything, you tend to produce useless things, and a lot of them. And you do that in the financial sphere as well in the real sphere. I think that these low interest rates are really not sustainable for a very long time, but apparently it seems to be the remedy for all the problems we're having. And may I and I mention one thing? We had 2 periods. I think one was 74, 75, where inflation jumped from 74. It was 2%. In 75, it was 11. The question is, all that money that is flying around. You have to, in a critical situation, you have to catch it back into the central bank, so to speak. That will be a challenge then, which we maybe be confronted with in 3 years from now. The thing is, you were mentioning that I was maybe a bit biased towards the bankers. I think it's not really true. The point is, I do this because I'm furious. I started banking in 1979. In Germany, we have something called a bank apprenticeship, and I did this after the school, and I loved that profession. I think that banking is a wonderful thing if exercised in a modest way, and I think it's also something which has a very high social value, not to speak of the monetary system, where I think it's the same like as a public good, like clean water or clean air. And there are a few people who apparently who pollute that, and I mean, why we don't allow it with environmental issues? Why do we allow it in banking?
Thank you. Other questions? Please.
Okay, first, thank you. How do you explain that these bankers who would get a spectacular comparative advantage in getting into this niche strategy of, the socially responsible and sustainable practice of banking, how do you explain that they don't take this advantage, and that people don't get through this communication about how banks do better and better for social responsibility over years? Thank you.
It's one of the big challenges, I think. We can expand that to business models of banking as a whole. Some people now may shout at me, but I think you can only make money as a bank when you have two things: intransparency and asymmetric information. We had these things this morning in a different context. And look at you, and I look at my kids, and they hate two things: asymmetric informations and intransparency. How will these guys get together with a bank and do business? I have no idea, and I'm afraid the banks don't either. As far as sustainable investments are concerned, I'm a big fan of ethical banking. We have, and I'm sure you have them in France too, we have two ethical banks in Germany. Total balance sheet, 700 million euro. So it's like a small savings bank, basically. And I think the problem with ethical banking is, my daughter once asked me why not everybody is eating biological correct food. And I said to her, because then 3 billion of us have to go and you decide who. And it's a little bit the same with ethical assets. There are just not enough ethical assets around. They can basically satisfy the needs of a normal client with, let's say, 20, 30, 50,000 euros to invest. Yeah, they can accommodate that. But I have a friend, for instance, who runs a pension fund of 3.5 billion, and he has in his constitution, he has written that he can only invest on a sustainable basis. And that tells us, I think, a lot about our society, that there are just not enough sustainable assets around. But that will develop over the next years, I'm sure.
Thank you. Oui.
Moi, je risquerais une question, mais en français, parce que mon anglais n'est pas suffisant. Donc, si monsieur ne le comprend pas, peut-être quelqu'un pourra faire la traduction. Je vous trouve très, très pessimiste sur la capacité des sociétés à comprendre et à réagir. Votre film est passionnant, il est très pédagogique, vous mettez en évidence effectivement des dérives qui sont tout à fait condamnables. Je crois que j'ai foi quand même dans la capacité des sociétés à comprendre et à se réformer. Alors, peut-être que c'est un mouvement français, mais en France, on a quand même quelque chose qui prend de l'ampleur, qui s'appelle l'investissement socialement responsable, RSI en anglais, qui fait que le consommateur est donc le maillon final de la chaîne, commence à s'exprimer sur ces questions-là et fait pression. On a un exemple concret, c'est l'histoire de la BNP, qui a été condamnée, vous le savez, par les États-Unis à une amende faramineuse. Il y a eu une prise de conscience et bon nombre de sociétés de gestion ont sorti la BNP de leur univers d'investissement. Donc là, il y a une sanction qui s'est faite. Donc je crois beaucoup quand même à la capacité du consommateur, du moins du maillon final, à se réveiller. J'aimerais vous entendre là-dessus, si quelqu'un peut.
Just a quick translation. You already, okay.
Le sujet que je traite, c'est la capacité du corps social à réagir. Et l'exemple concret, c'est BNP.
I would like to answer that in a more general way. I think I didn't really get what you were talking about. I think that there is, at least I can say that for Germans, very little interest in money. In the sense that what happens with my money. Yeah, we take a lot of care about where our coffee comes from and how much energy our refrigerators are needing and so on, not with money. And we have one of these ethical banks, it's called GLS. What they do is if you open an account, you get a sheet. And on that sheet, you have to tick what's going to happen with your money. So they have something like renewable energy, social issues, children, medical care, stuff like that. So you decide what happens with your money. And one board member of those guys has told me that people are very, very irritated because they never thought about these things. And a lot of them, and I mean these are people my age, that's their main target group, well situated and so on. They take this sheet home, make a dinner, invite their friends, and for the first time, the people start to talk about money. And what does money mean for me? Yeah, I find it interesting. You can do a lot of things with money. Money for everybody, for any of us, is something different, maybe. Yeah, you have people who buy a red Porsche, and hunt beautiful girls. I think that's okay because if it's part of a reflective action. Other people, donate money. They take a lot of satisfaction from giving money away. Also acceptable and a nice thing. Yeah. For me, for instance, Dostoevsky once said, money is printed freedom. That's what money is for me, because it enables me in the morning to decide what I want to do over the day. I'm free of, things I have to do. I don't have to go to an office at 9 in the morning. Yeah. And so I think the first step before we find a new money order, I think that will be the end, by the way. We can discuss a lot about fiat money, which is, it's nonsense. Yeah. But the first thing is that we have to start at ourselves, I think. Not because I think it's an ideal situation, but I don't believe in, or I don't think that politics will help us out here, or some white knight will come and release us from all this pain. Yeah, it's something we have to attack ourselves, and I think the first step is on an individual basis to define what money means for me. Is it something different? Yeah, I mean, think about Caviel. If I'm correctly informed, he did all this without the aspect of profiting monetarily as a person. Yeah. So why do you rob a bank? Basically, you go into a bank, take out your gun, point it at the cashier and tell him, give me your money. So he puts the money on the table, and then you turn around and say, I just wanted to know whether it works and work out again. Yeah? My firm conviction is that he wanted to be loved by Société Générale, yeah? Or whatever word you want to choose for it. And I think the same is something which we have to do for ourselves. We have to define what money means for us and then take it from there and maybe change the way we handle our money.
But in the movie you say that for banking, the banking system does not learn. It never learns. But do you think that the society as a whole can learn from the past crisis and then evolve into more socially responsible investment and behavior, etc.?
It's a big hope I have, but I think at the moment there are too many people who believe in rationality running around. Rationality basically is the ultimate goal that we all have. Everything has to be rational, not emotional, very rational. And look at what happens in the financial crises. I mean, they come every few years, yeah. And apparently, Homo economicus is not as clever as he thinks he is. Yeah. And those crises always start upon two assumptions, which are basically wrong. The first assumption is this time it's going to be different. And the second time is, even if it's the same than it used to be, I will be the last and most clever guy who gets out last. And this is why this system is always oscillating. Yeah? And I cannot, think about it, I cannot imagine a better graphic representation of manic depression than a chart of an index. Take Wall Street or whatever, yeah, over years. It goes like this, yeah. And there's a difference between a manic depressive and a depressive. The depressive feels the pressure and he goes to sees his doctor and he gets medication or treatment and maybe he's healed. The manic depressive, he goes to the doctor and just before he pushes the bell, he thinks, well, wasn't that bad, was it? Yeah, and then he goes back home and then the manic phase starts until the next depression comes, but he's never going to go for treatment. And it's the same with the capital markets. We will see these pictures in TV of traders, going like, and they will tell us that the world is going to end, And then when we are down at the very, very bottom, yeah, the depression is very, very low and the system is just about to think about a serious reset. Wall Street picks up 200 points. And then the guy goes, oh, lucky again, And then it's another 200 and say, hey. Yeah. And I think that is psychopathic, yeah.
Thank you very much for your film and for being here. I have two questions, one on Greece and one on Germany. The one on Greece is regarding the impact of a coming parliamentary election. If Syriza wins, what do you think it will lead to? Either Greece going out of the euro, or will it lead to an explosion of the euro? What is, for you, the most likely scenario? And the second question I have is regarding Germany, because there has been, since the last crisis, there has been a lot of pressure on Germany in order to guarantee the overall system. With a shared guarantee, yeah. if a country default, then the others will bail him out and things like this. And obviously, I'm completely against the system. And if I were German, I will be against it. Obviously, I think it's also very dangerous for us Frenchmen, because if we believe we have a German guarantee, then we will never change. And if it's true for us, it's true for the others probably also. In your mind, can you tell us today whether Germany will ever agree or not to guarantee such a system, European system?
The first question was Greece, right? I think neither of the two that you have described. It will depend a little bit on how many votes Syriza gets. I think in order to have an absolute majority, you need something in Greece between 33 and 46%, because of these 50 seats that you get on top if you win. And that will depend pretty much how many parties make it above the 3% line. The less, the higher the chance that Tsipras will run the shop alone. That will give him a lot of negotiation power, I would call it. But if we have seen one thing about over the last 2 or 3 years, the EU is very good, and especially Draghi and Juncker, in what the Americans call kicking the can down the road. Yeah, I mean, I'm furious at my own government, yeah, because it's very anti-democratic what's happening there. Yeah, 2 years ago we were discussing about Eurobonds. Yeah, and it was a question that was basically a taboo. Yeah, because if we had voted, it would have been a blast against Eurobonds. Yeah, and what happens now is we get the Eurobonds through the back door, undemocratic and more expensive than before. We have to see how this liability process tomorrow is lined out. I'm sure there will be a lot of concessions, and I think personally that the markets will be very, very disappointed tomorrow. Yeah, you know, the rest, do you like the EU or not? You know, I think it's a little bit of a philosophy, yeah? I can say you are right and you can say I'm wrong, you know? The thing is, as I said before, we have this thing, yeah? And I think to unwind it will be very, very costly and very difficult. Was it a mistake to do it like this? Yes, I'm sure, yeah? But, you know, there's always this question about, you know, whether Mitterrand promised the German unity, forgetting the euro and all that stuff. Yeah, I don't know what else we got for it. Yeah, that will be a secret for a long time. But you know, let me put it like this: 5 years from now, the euro will still exist. It won't be the same countries than they are today. That I'm sure.
What about the guarantee by Germany? Do you think they will never accept that, or do you think they will let it go one day?
If AfD goes down the drain and these stupid demonstrations stop, maybe not now. No way. If she would do it, AfD next elections, which are in Hamburg, I think 27-30%. Alternative für Deutschland. It's a new right-wing movement, and they have basically the founder was an economics professor from Hamburg, and it's you know, the criticism of the EU and the euro as a currency is their business model, and they can always claim, you know, we told you all that 1 year ago and so on, and you know how people are.
Yes, please.
Thank you. It's very interesting and great to have this discussion with you, and I think it's great to have this discussion and to have seen the movie after the conference. I work with the energy regulator, so I wanted to ask you questions about regulation. In the conference, in the previous conference, one speaker commented on the crisis, saying that it was not necessarily a regulatory failure, but a surveillance failure of banks. Anyway, whether it's regulation or surveillance, do you think that lessons were learned from the regulator's point of view, that the regulation improved to avoid future crises? And perhaps a related question, there is some discussion which is pretty much advanced, if I understand it correctly, in the US, perhaps less in Europe, about separation between speculative activities of banks and the normal, boring banker job. Do you think it's real, or do you think it's bogus?
Let me start with the regulation, if I may. I'm not an expert on banking regulation, but I can tell you that had you told me 1 year ago where we would stand today, I would have never thought that. I think the progress on the regulatory side, I'm really impressed. Having said that, I don't think it will yield a lot. Yeah. I mean, there were instances like, you know, no bank does own account trading anymore, apparently. Yeah? 4 or 6 weeks ago, there was a merger of 2 pharmaceutical companies, AbbVie and Spire. Yeah? And that merger was for some reason was cancelled. And all of a sudden, the primary equity traders of 6 or 7 banks had losses of 80 million. How do you do that if you don't do own account trading? Yeah, so I think, and this is something I try to convey with that movie. Yeah, you have to think how the people think, and I think that's very difficult for a regulator. Yeah, you think it's about money, you think it's about laws. I'll make you a very easy example. We can agree very quickly how to limit speculative business in banks. We just increase capital for those instruments we don't like. Yeah, so they become more expensive, and they produce less of it, and we're happy. That's common sense, okay? Now you are talking to an investment banker, and the guy goes, well, if I want to make the same money as before, I have to increase risk, right? So what is meant as a measure to take risk out of the system, yeah, increases the risk as soon as it hits the mind of the investment banker. And that is something which is very, very difficult to grasp, close to impossible. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even talking about surveillance. I'm more, you know, maybe I'm too naive or too simple structured to see that. But you know, I compare it with a you know, big tree in your garden. Yeah, and we start to cut it with a nail scissor, and we need a chainsaw. And we're not there yet, and it's politically, you know, it's always, there are always these things, yeah. I mean, words are cheap, yeah. There are always those people, yeah. Bankers have, or the Bundesbank, great. I sat with a Bundesbank board member 2 weeks ago on a panel, and he was always saying banks have to take responsibility. I said, Mr. Dombert, banks they can't take responsibility. Bankers and people can take. He just was on a different planet, yeah, and. Then there are these people, you know, we have to have a bank go bankrupt. Yeah, I think that's cheap talk. Yeah, you have to be very clear. And I mean, if you work in regulation, you may follow me. There will be corpses on the street. Yeah, if SocGen goes bust over a weekend, you will have the guillotine again. Yeah, so it's always cheap, you know. Yeah, they have to take responsibility. Let them go bust and so on. It's not going to work. Yeah. And the collateral damages are so big that the politicians cannot take the measures that they maybe perceive as necessary. Yeah? I always compare the situation if somebody hands you a white balloon and a pin and tells you, deflate that balloon, but make sure it goes and not bang. And what do? You do nothing. Yeah? So it's not that the politicians don't understand all this, as far as I can tell. The clever people, yeah, they know what is to do, but it's so difficult, yeah. And every time, anywhere I am, yeah, there are people who tell me how a perfect banking system looks like. That's cheap, yeah. Give me a sheet of paper, 100% minimum reserve requirement, yeah, split banking system, you will never have a crisis. But that's not the task. What we are doing is we are operating on a marathon runner while he's running the New York Marathon. And that's a completely different thing, from my point of view.
Thank you very much. It's 8, then we will stop with this conclusion. Thank you again for your presence, and we are very glad for having this opportunity to discuss with you. Thank you.